Welcome to the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast with Tony Stabile and Steve Rockamaniac.
There's a rowdy crowd today.
And everybody, welcome to the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast, breaking news edition. We're back because Steve and I are journalists, apparently, as Mercer has described us before in the past. We're here to talk about the wonderfully tasteful, tasty, I should say. Not tasteful, because it's not tasteful on TNA's side. Wonderfully tasty, moist, tender news that we've had all afternoon. The departure of the Broken Hardys from TNA and the complete shit show that it is surrounding the negotiations that these guys had to remain with the company. And I think with also Drew Galloway leaving, this is maybe the beginning of a couple other guys leaving the company in the same fashion. Steve, what's going on, brother?
Hey now, everybody. As yes, breaking news edition of the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast. As you know, it's what basically we have a very busy week, and we have obviously WrestleMania season well into high gear at this point. This Sunday we've got WWE Fastlane, and of course there's all sorts of other things going along all around this. You got UFC coming up this weekend. You got a doubleheader weekend. You got obviously WrestleMania 34 days away, Charlotte, as she apparently doesn't know how to count. And now the biggest bombshell is this, middle of the Monday afternoon, all of a sudden my phone starts buzzing like crazy, and I'm wondering what's going on. And as it turns out, well, the more things change, the more things stay the same. And, well, let's see. Where do we start? Of course, it's all started last night as Drew Galloway announced on Twitter that he would be departing from Impact Wrestling. And it had been, kind of rumored for a little while that, both he as well as the Hardys contract were about to come up, and whether or not they were going to be at the upcoming Impact tapings was in question at this point. And, whether or not TNA was going to be able to re-sign these guys also was being in question. And as it would turn out last night, when Drew Galloway announced publicly that he was gone from TNA, the rumors started to come out that the Hardy Boys were also going to follow him on the way out the door. And at the time, negotiations were still ongoing between the Hardys and TNA. And Dave Meltzer reports this morning that the talks between the Hardys and TNA fell apart. And unless some sort of drastic change were to happen, they were gone. And as the day went along and the reactions started to, pour out onto Twitter and, pretty much across the board in the wrestling world, the details slowly started to come out, and a lot of very interesting tweets hit the interwebs. And let's get into the details here, as at least one of the sources, Pro Wrestling Sheet, was reporting today that the reason that Matt and Jeff Hardy are not going to be re-signing with TNA is due to the way the contract negotiations played out. They felt extremely disrespected after, what was basically, much like, I guess, shades of old TNA, where they were kind of like, grabbing at every penny. So details were as follows. Apparently, and we had talked about this, we had heard about this, the Hardys had more or less agreed to terms to re-sign with TNA back in, late November, early December. They had more or less agreed on a money number and dates and so on and so forth. But, they just wanted to obviously finalize things and put it onto paper. And while waiting for that finalized offer, days and weeks started to pass by. And, since Impact Wrestling only films every 2 to 3 months, it was one of those situations, and especially for anyone who, hasn't gotten, I guess, all of the impression on how badly TNA has been run in the last few years. There's plenty of sources on that out there in the wrestling world. If you haven't heard the podcast where Bruce Pritchard talks about everything backstage in TNA. It's a 3-hour podcast, and it's just uncanny. Some of the stories that come out about how badly some of those negotiations went down over the years. And this is just another example as, now after weeks and weeks went by and Matt Hardy kept, calling the office and saying, well, hey, what's going on? Like, is the contract on its way? We want to get this out of the way. Eventually, Matt had his lawyer contact Impact Wrestling and say, listen, just since if you are drawing up the final contract, we want you to put in there that we want creative control over our characters. And I mean, just before we continue, I'm sure you would agree, Tony, that they deserve it. I mean, if anything, this past year, anything that was positive about Impact Wrestling is thanks to the Hardy Boys. It's thanks to the new characters. It's thanks to the work that they did over the past year, that any sort of momentum TNA started to build was thanks to them. So I think creative control and their demand for creative control over their characters is something that was, definitely justifiable.
For discussion's sakes, I'm just going to put it out there.
Yeah.
When creative control is thrown at you, dangerous things happen. Let's refer to the 90s, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Hulk Hogan, Macho Man. All these guys started getting creative control. That's a little weird. And it created for many unique circumstances in WCW, which, eventually led to its downfall. Here we are, though, where a guy has proven track record where he didn't have contractual creative control of his character, but for the better part of 2016, when did Broken Matt Hardy really happen? I think towards May, June, and then we had the final deletion and all those things. So let's go May to December, and even May until now. The character that he was allowed to develop, the storylines that he was able to come up with, versus Jeff, then with Jeff, and then the tag team division, so on and so forth, that was the most entertaining part of TNA. So he's proven that with his creative control, with his creative mind or creative input, he put on the best parts of the show. So then in that case, when you look at it from that standpoint, totally made sense. And I would let the guy, have the ball and run with it. Plus, on a creative standpoint, he's run, Omega Wrestling or whatever it's called?
Back in the day, yeah.
No, but that company still exists today to this point. So I don't know how involved he is with it because, I think he does make sporadic appearances for it. I know Jeff did up until very recently. So it's one of those things where, I feel if you're negotiating, that's something to put in there. It's it's something to look at and actually truly look into. It's not like Shane Helms going, give me creative control. No, this is Matt Hardy, the guy who's kept your company relevant for the past year, who's made the most important parts. In fact, has saved money for you by doing those things out of his compound because they didn't have to rent for that. And it was widely known. They did 99% of that on the fly, on their dime, or on the cheap. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And loyalty in this point, in my mind, is very important. That's where I kind of get upset. So I'm just I'm gonna slide something in there for the sake of discussion, and I think it's gonna push what you're saying. Is here you are. I'm Matt Hardy. I'm getting dicked around a little bit. So now I'm like, okay, they're waiting or they're baited and they're stalling. So what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna spark the discussion again. I'm not gonna say where's my contract. Now I'm gonna be like, well, no, throw this into my contract. Let's restart the negotiation. Maybe that's something that, will bring them into action. So maybe that was even just a ploy just to get them to start moving.
I think you have a point there in that, and definitely once we mention the next point, it plays into that in the sense that when the Hardys told TNA officials like, hey, we want some sort of creative control put into our contract, it was immediately shot down by the officials. And in fact, apparently someone within TNA then responded to them saying, or more directly to their lawyer saying, well, tell them to go to WWE then. And, all the things that they've done that you just mentioned over this past year that for that company and all along, okay, during this contract negotiation of the two guys, okay, Jeff Hardy was kind of like, hey, I don't want to go back to the WWE. I don't know about like, doing that schedule. And I understand because Jeff Hardy's always been like that. He didn't want to like do that schedule. He didn't want to go back to WWE. And all along he was kind of like, hey, I don't want to go back there, Matt. Like maybe could we figure something out to stay here? But Matt was kind of interested to get that one last chance of taking what has been a huge character now within the TNA world to a whole new level in another company and obviously within the WWE. But when the TNA official apparently responded to the Hardy's lawyer saying, go to WWE, Jeff Hardy had a fit. And he took it as a huge slap in the face and immediately told Matt, listen, I ain't going back to TNA. Screw them. But Matt Hardy continued at that point to negotiate with TNA. He wanted to resign anyways. And excuse me, maybe, Jeff would have came around or maybe Jeff just would have left. But they eventually, continued it. And the original terms of their deal was that it was going to be a 1-year deal. Okay. And that was the contract that they agreed to back in December. Then finally, after Jeff kind of screw them, I'm not going. And Matt continues kind of the negotiations without really telling them that Jeff's about to take off. They received the paperwork and apparently TNA changed it from a 1-year deal to a 2-year deal and put in some extra little terms hidden in the small print saying, well, we get 10% off of all your bookings on the indie scene that you go out and do. So they're like, listen, hey, you're going to go out in the indie scene. You're going to make a bunch of money on us. So you know what? We're going to take 10% off the top. And well, at that point said, Matt's lawyer actually told him, well, you're a fool if you sign this contract. And so Matt told him, well, you know what? We're gone. We're done. We're out of here and we're on our way out. And we don't know where we're going, but thank you. Have a nice day.
And there's two things on that, though.
Right.
The word I got was he even offered to go to Impact, go to the tapings.
Yes.
Be like, listen, let me drop the titles, write me out, kill me, whatever you want to do. I'm going to play ball for you guys.
They both were. They were both going to go and drop the titles, okay? Because technically, although the only thing that's not clear is the exact date that their current contract finishes on. But no matter what, it was clear and made clear to TNA officials that, listen, if whatever happens, whether we sign, re-sign, don't sign, we're going to come to the next tapings. Give us a 1-night deal. We don't want to sign a deal, actually. We're going to come on our word. Okay. Everything's good. We'll come on the contract that we currently have, the amount that we're going to show up and we'll do what you want. And if we are going to leave, we'll drop the titles. No big deal. It's all good. And TNA was just like, no. Don't come here. We don't want to see you. And that it was okay. So now at this point, okay, we'll talk in a few minutes about, some of the tweets that have come out. Rebby Hardy tweeting some very interesting information. But, at this point, you look at the trajectory here and you see, okay, they start negotiations. Negotiations seemingly go well. They come to a more or less agreement. TNA goes back to the way it used to be, where it starts to, dawdle on things administrative wise. And, doesn't get the contract sent out. And once again, talent start to wonder what the hell is going on. This has been documented so well in TNA's past. And then they decide to get in a little bit of a, fight here and negotiations get going. And then TNA gets greedy. Now, don't get me wrong. Okay. Don't get me wrong. I understand that the Fight Network just invested a large amount of money to overtake a large amount of debt after TNA or after Dixie Carter ran that company into the ground. I understand that they put a lot of money into this and they need to try to somehow, cut some losses, make some money back. But they apparently relied on, the people that they have in place right now to decide to get greedy and say, hey, we're going to take 10% off your booking and you're going to give it straight to us. So free money for us. Plus we get to keep you on our TV as the best possible, characters that we have in the company, and then they just let it all, blow up. And then not only do they let it blow up because they basically slapped these two guys in the face after everything that they've done for them for the past year, but in addition to that, they decide to say, don't come to TV. We don't want to see you. You're done with us? No problem. Goodbye. And it's like, it's at this point, you say to yourself, you got to be kidding me. I thought this is the new TNA. This seems like the old TNA.
Here's the problem, though. This is the old TNA because, all right, you can slap a new parent company on it, much like the Canadians did. They went from Bell to Molson, which Molson was the original company, or a company that was long-standing behind it. Here you have Anthem comes in, and then what do? They bring back Jeff Jarrett. They bring back Dutch Mantel. Now, maybe the front office people, those are all Torontonians. Those are all people from Anthem. But much like Dixie Carter, they're not wrestling people. So what do? When negotiating, they turn to the wrestling guy. Dixie at the very beginning turned to Jeff Jarrett, then she turned to Kurt and Hulk and Bischoff, and then eventually just her own insaneness. So you look at these things, and I'm sure what happened here was, people in Anthem's ears, so guys like Dutch Mantel, guys like that. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just gonna say maybe somebody stepped up and went, well, you know what? Maybe they're a little, in their minds are like, no, this Matt and Jeff, they're a little too over. I don't like that. So they turn on, they tell Anthem, they're not that great. Don't give them what they need. Don't give them what they want. Don't, they didn't do nothing for us. Look, they were at the top and the company failed and you guys had to buy it. Had nothing to do with the Hardys. So it's that really weird thing. And then secondly, as you mentioned it, the whole 10% kind of really pisses me off because that 10% in my mind goes for a thing where the guy needs them to get booked. So what's that Everett kid? Matt Everett or whatever. I don't know his name, and I feel really bad for not knowing. But a lot of the guys on the undercard, Mahabali Shira or whatever his name is.
It really doesn't matter what the name is at that point.
Exactly.
It's insert name here who's currently on TNA who was never in WWE.
Exactly. They need the weekly exposure to then in turn around to an indie booker and go, listen, put me on your show. I'm going to get you, TV pop. And this is my price. All right, no problem. If the indie booker wants that guy, here we go. That's what happens. Now, the only reason that kid has a name to go to that indie to go to that indie booker is because of his time in TNA. Matt and Jeff Hardy don't need no TNA. They're built off of WWE and their own reputation. So the fact that TNA would be like, no, you're giving us 10%, that's complete hokum bullshit because they don't need it. They're not there. TNA needs them. If anything, every indie booking that Matt and Jeff Hardy would get, TNA should be like, all right, well, we're going to pay 10% of it to you guys because it's free advertising. All he has to do is go, I knew you'd come. And they'd be like, watch me on Impact at the end of a promo. And there you go.
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
your advertisement. And the guy did it for free. The guy was, if there's anything that really pisses me off, because now I'm really going to take it personal. I'm a big fan of loyalty, and I guess that makes me a bad businessman, maybe. But if anything, I'm very loyal to a fault. So if I sit there and I come in here and here's a guy who saved a taping for us. Here's a guy who, when we realized, oh shit, we haven't taped enough content, we don't have enough money to get another one going, he goes, oh, don't worry about it, we'll tape at my compound. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Here's
Absolutely.
a guy who did all of that, who went out of his way for your company, who took your company on his back. And I'm not even talking about Jeff, just strictly Matt in this circumstance. Like, yes, it's a performance. Yes, he got over. Yes, he did. Probably 90% of it was for him and for him alone. But even if it's just that 10%, that 10% alone carried your company and made you relevant. Listen, you and I and the show, the only times I've gone out of my way to explicitly watch TNA is when somebody says Matt Hardy. I'm like, okay, I'm there. King Maxwell. Okay, I'm there. Final Deletion 2, Delete or Decay. All that shit, what a Tag Team Apocalypto. It's all because of Matt. No one else sold me on that. I wasn't sold on Bobby Lashley. I love Davey Richards. I love Eddie Edwards, Cody Rhodes. I love all those guys. But you know what? I can see them in other places. And that's where I go to watch them because I don't have to deal with the other storylines.
Yeah, and
so I sit there and I'm like, I owe this guy.
Oh yeah, for sure. And just to touch on it here, about 10 hours ago, Rebby Hardy decided to tweet saying it. I've said it many times. TNA was the perfect situation for our family, and how grateful I was for the professionalism, the open communication, and the respect. Now think about what kind of negative changes and straight fuckery would have to go down for us to leave. And of course, Matt Hardy also tweets out something similar once he confirms that he was leaving. And I mean, to play off of your point earlier, and I don't want to trash these guys. I do know some people who work within that company, and I don't want to necessarily trash this company. And I know we don't normally touch too much on UFC unless there's some sort of wrestling crossover, like when Brock Lesnar came back or when CM Punk debuted. But if you look at the UFC right now with their new owners who spend tons, hands over fist, to buy that company, and have begged celebrities to pump in money for them, and pretending that they're giving out shares, and you look at some of the things that have been going down in the last few months within that company, where guys who were extremely loyal to that company, Mike Goldberg, for example, being shown the door with not even a thank you or a goodbye. And it's almost the same situation here where, you have these two guys that, as you mentioned, willingly said, hey, come to our backyard and we're going to film here, who, spend hours on end. Technically they did this over, let's say a few nights. And, these are not booked nights. These are not nights that we're booked to go to Florida to do our TV taping. These are just extra nights in their backyard as part of a creative process, and they decide to take the time out and try to help this company as much as they can, and you just see, like, almost as if an ungrateful motion here, like you said a few minutes ago, where it's like, well, hey, the Hardys, maybe, I don't know, I don't like their attitude, let's get rid of them, they just think they're so full of themselves. Well, it's just shocking, honestly. And you see by the reaction. I mean, earlier today, I tweeted out a poll about where would the fans want to see the Hardy Boys next, which federation or promotion would they like to see the Hardy Boys in next. And obviously it was runaway over 90% of the respondents voting for WWE instead of in the rest. I guess it was ROH, New Japan, Indies, getting 2, 3, 4% on those other options. But I had the results were flying in, the votes were flying in within a matter of moments. People were piling in these votes. The reaction was huge. I've never seen such a quick reaction to one of our polls that we put out for the show. And also throughout the rest of the late afternoon into the early evening, I mean, the reaction was not only huge on a global level, but on a local level. I mean, my phone kept buzzing throughout a few hours and people like freaking out over this situation. And I mean, all the reaction and interactions on Twitter. I mean, for example, Fighter Hayabusa at FTR Hayabusa responding to us saying, hey, the Hardys might as well cash in while they're at it. They're at their hottest. They could do dream matches for the next few years. Why stay in TNA? Just go to the WWE. And, despite the fact that that's true, they still wanted to stay there and try to build that company, much like, I guess, Sting did too. I mean, for years we said Sting should leave. Sting should go to the WWE, get his final run in. And unfortunately, even though he got his WWE run in before the end of his career, if you want to call it a run, he could have done so much more but it didn't get the chance to because he spent so many years in TNA, and being loyal to Dixie Carter. And it's true. They could do better elsewhere. And this is going to be huge. This is one of these huge stories. In 10 months from now, when we do some sort of look back on 2017, this could be huge, because if the Hardys do in fact go back to the WWE, oh my God. Now, of course, there is still some sort of debate going on right now. Dave Meltzer saying that a big argument amongst the wrestling community is whether or not Matt Hardy would have the right to the character to since he developed it, he came up with it, he then put it into action, and TNA claims that they some ownership to it, and saying that they would not be allowed to continue the same character in the WWE, but Matt Hardy claiming that he owns the rights to it according to his contract. So that part's still to be determined, but wow, imagine.
I wouldn't put it past Dixie to be that dumb. Like, if I'm looking corporate wise, I wouldn't put it past Dixie to be that dumb to be like, oh yeah, you totally have the rights to your IP.
Yeah, I wouldn't be. I totally agree with you.
Oh man, I wouldn't put it past her.
But think about this, man. I think it was a recent edition of the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast. You and I were sitting here talking about the fact that the tag team division. Geez, the tag team division is like, I don't know. We'll just go with the word pure crap right now. I mean, it's practically non-existent. The Bullet Club, who I'm a fan of, just seems like lost in the shuffle.
Oh, they're neutered.
Like,
even as champions, they're neutered.
Exactly, and I don't, that's this SmackDown's not that much better. So, you kind of look at it and you say, wow, the tag team division is practically non-existent at this point. And just imagine if you were to get the Hardys as a tag team in the WWE when we look back on 2017, and if they are actually able to do these characters in the WWE. Oh my gosh, we're in for some good stuff coming up here for the rest of 2017.
It's going to be something. So, at the end of the day, there are some people that have thrown the gimmick out there, and they're like, oh no, they're they're all swerving people. I think at this point, it's pretty safe to say, yeah, no, this is a done deal at this point. I mean, it's really ridiculous where you stand that in 2016. Knowing that all this information would get out there, TNA would let themselves, or Impact Wrestling, or even Anthem at this point, will let themselves be shown in such a horrible light, and it's squarely on them at this point. You had two guys who were looking to play ball with you, and looking to play softball with you. They weren't even going deep. Like, listen, they said it, and Rebby Sky said it. It's the perfect situation for their family. TNA guys have to show up to TNA and work once every 3 months for a couple of days. How hard is that of a lifestyle?
Oh, absolutely. And they
run the opposite of New Japan loops. Think about that.
Oh yeah, and they had the chance to fix it. They knew they screwed up, but they had the chance to fix it. That's what the interesting part was, because Dave Meltzer kind of mentions it earlier today, and for a moment there, I said to myself, maybe this ends up being half work. Why? Because it didn't mean for sure, and one thing's for sure, they haven't signed their WWE deal yet. They may have had some initial contacts, some talks, but they haven't agreed to terms with the WWE or New Japan or Ring of Honor or anybody for that matter. And they could have fixed this. They could have realized, like, okay, everybody calm down. All right. Whoa. All right. Let's sit back down here. Let's talk about this. Let's hammer this out. You guys were important to us. And no, of course, Jeff Hardy was already well off the handle at this point. And he's just like, screw you guys. We're going home. A la Eric Cartman at this point.
Yeah, I was about to call you out on that one.
Yeah. So, and look at the tweets, man. Look, Matt Hardy, I have never been more awake. The creative renaissance is merely beginning. Anything is possible in my broken universe. Anything. And he says, I wish Impact Wrestling all the best going forward, especially the industrious talent. I hope they're all treated with respect and fairness.
Whoa. If you're going to read his tweets, I demand you do it in his accent.
Yeah, I'm not doing it. You go ahead.
No, but nonetheless, here's a guy who showed a lot of classes. Like, listen, company fucked me over, but the guys working in front of the camera, awesome people. Simple as that.
And I got to be honest with you, the last couple of months when, this discussion has been going on, and we'll touch briefly on Drew Galloway here. There was talks about how these three guys, their contract was coming up. And Drew Galloway is a guy who, obviously did not, he showed some potential within the WWE world. When he was on the SmackDown roster at that time, when SmackDown was actually better than Raw on a weekly basis, he had the potential to become a big star, but ultimately they let him go. And he, succeeded in TNA. And at the same time, as we've just spent the last, 25 minutes discussing how important the Hardy Boys have been to TNA and how huge this could be for the WWE now, what is to happen with these guys is like, hey, Drew Galloway, I said to myself, you know what? If he resigns with TNA, great. But if he doesn't, I don't want to see him back in the WWE. This is just my personal opinion. I don't want to see him back in the WWE. I don't think he's gonna. I don't think it's gonna work for him back in the WWE at this point in time. I think he should go to Ring of Honor. I think he should go to New Japan. I think he should go somewhere else and do something over there. And as opposed to going back to the WWE. But honestly, the last couple of months, while they've been discussing these rumors that their contracts are coming up, there's a possibility that these guys could leave. They could resign, but they could leave. And I thought to myself, what would I would love to see the Hardys back in the WWE. I've been thinking about this. I said this is something that I would actually be interested in because of anything that's happened in TNA over the past year and a half. The only time I've watched, as you alluded to earlier in the show, the only time I've watched is when you forced me to because we were going to talk about it on the Priority Wrestling podcast. And even though I was quote unquote forced to, I kind of enjoyed some of the stuff that they were doing.
But here, I'm going to throw something that's going to scare you.
Mm-hmm.
Dudley Boys.
Okay.
Here are two guys that left TNA.
Right.
Devon had been out for a little while, but Bubba had been there.
Mm-hmm.
Come to WWE, and WWE, the first thing they do is they're like, no, you're a nostalgia act. Dress up like it's 2002.
Mm-hmm.
Here's my question. Because don't forget, Bubba Ray Dudley had the best character in TNA when he left. Bully Ray had been himself, had really flourished, and had been this awesome thing. In comes to WWE, got fat immediately because I bet you he realized, oh yeah, no, I ain't gonna do much. So, the Hardys signed with WWE. What's to say that they're gonna do something Broken Matt Hardy-esque? Or they're just gonna be like, no, you're gonna wear the baggy pants, you're gonna wear the mesh top, and also grow your douchebag beard back. Drop the blonde streak, and Jeff, just stay off of drugs, and you'll be fine.
Okay. I have two responses for that.
Please.
Okay. First and foremost, unlike the Dudley Boys, both these guys were major single stars within WWE. Okay, so even if they were to unfortunately go down that route of using the tag team as the nostalgia act, if they were to eventually split them up, they would still become huge single stars again.
Okay.
And I think they could have great singles runs again, especially with some of the new stars that are now within the WWE that weren't there when they were first there. Second of all, the fact that the WWE kind of realizes that there was a lot of buzz around these guys. They can't drop the ball on this, and I think there's a recent example that kind of proves that they realized that. And AJ Styles, as we discussed on this show recently, after the Royal Rumble, I said, let's look back on this past year. Let's think about AJ Styles. And there was a few months where you said, whoa, AJ Styles is going down into the gutter, isn't he? And I said, no, it's going well. It's good. It's fine. And eventually look where it went. And so I think that they realized that there's a certain value there. That what happened, I think, with the Dudley Boys in the first month or so, it looked like, hey, this is going to be great. The event after, they just kind of realized that, like, hey, how many more? I don't know why they just never gave them the titles. It's like they didn't pull it. And I think even though the Dudley Boys were over, they weren't over to this new level, like the Hardy Boys were, and like AJ Styles was. And so, there has been somewhat of a new track record here being developed by the WWE. Maybe thankfully to Triple H, who not only has the NXT thing going, where we've now for years talked about guys that we would have liked to see in the WWE and thought they would never make it, but finally get their spots. And not just get their spots, but get over. But then AJ Styles, who went straight to the main roster. He came from Japan because he was in Japan, but he was in TNA before that and still got his chance to get over and get pushed and become champion. And I think they could do the same thing here with the Hardy Boys. If they were, now I think the biggest unanswered question here, which would probably determine whether your opinion or my opinion ends up being the reality, will be the fact that the character can be used or not used. Okay, so if they can't,
here's a character. No, I think this is where WWE and TNA, like, I think they're fine. A person acting a certain way you can't trademark, but if like the name Broken Matt Hardy and Brother Nero are somehow like written down in some sort of contract with TNA, then yeah, it makes sense. They can't use those names, but a guy acting a certain way, you can't really stop that. So I think personality is fine.
I don't want to even try to break down American law or even pretend as if I understand anything about American law, but I do know, looking at history, that WWE sued WCW in regards to Scott Hall and Kevin Nash. So
yeah, but that got thrown out right away.
Well, there's some debate about that, actually. There might have been a payoff somewhere. So they've talked about this in the past. So I'm not gonna even try to start a debate on American law at this point, and whether it's I think ultimately just we have to leave it as if these characters can be used within the WWE world, then as a tag team, this is huge for the WWE.
Yeah.
If they can't use the character, then I think you're right. As the tag team, they're going to become the Dudley Boys. I agree with you there. But they then could split them up. And unlike, Devon and Bubba Ray, these two guys, actually got over as single stars in the WWE and was world champion at one point. So imagine, a Jeff Hardy or a Matt Hardy against some of the bigger stars now within the WWE world, and some of those dream matches that you get to see within the WWE world before the end of these guys' run. And I think, that's kind of the point that's been made across the board today in regards to the fact that, at these guys' age, and that's why the last couple of months when I've been thinking about this situation, I've been rooting for the fact that these guys would return to the WWE, not because I, want TNA to not succeed. It's because at this point in time, at this age, that window is kind of closing on the possibility of them returning and still being in a certain shape in order to actually have a good run. And so, that we've talked about this on a few different occasions about different guys, and these two guys are still in a good enough shape to actually have a run that could be significant. Kurt Angle, who is in a different situation in terms of age and in terms of body shape, he can have something that, could go on for a month or two that people are going to be excited for, maybe for WrestleMania 34, where maybe he steps in the ring and has a big match. But, that's like Sting, something that may be too little too late. But the Hardys still have something in them. And I think that's why, 10 months from now, when we look back on 2017, if these guys do actually come back to the WWE at WrestleMania and they are going to be in the area at WrestleMania, as Gabe Sapolsky was quick to point out this afternoon on Twitter, saying that they will be at the, the Evolve show and meet and greets and so on and so forth with Senior Benjamin. There is a possibility that they could come back at WrestleMania, and 10 months from now, we will be saying, wow, what? When you look at the big moments of 2017, this could be, especially if they use that character, one of those big moments and one of those big developments that helps WWE in an immense way, especially that tag team division, which, I mean, damn, man, that's struggling pretty hardcore right now.
Yeah, at the end of the day, if Senior Benjamin gets a contract out of this, I'm a pop huge.
King Maxwell could go to NXT.
The longest NXT run in the world, 21 years.
Yes, exactly. And Rebby Skyle will end Charlotte's run. No, it's okay.
Well, wait a second here. Does Rebby Skyle need 3 contracts? One for her and one for her boobs, like each?
No, WWE they don't give contracts to boobs. They're an obligation. They're an obligation. It's like one of those. It's like where TNA tried to sneak in the 10%. WWE puts in a line where you have to have a certain amount of size boob, otherwise you have to get breast implants. That's just a WWE standard.
Well, no, in 2016 it's either it's boob or ass ratio.
Yes, of course.
All right. So on that note, guys, we're going to leave it at there, but we want to know the poll. That was really awesome. I mean, you guys jumped on it. You fair tweeps out there jumped on it, letting us know WWE's overwhelming where you want to see these guys. And I think that's very indicative of what might come, because WWE have started listening to the people, at least who they have on the roster. Not necessarily who they place in great positions. So let us know in the comments, in tweets, all over the place. So at Rowdy Wrestling, at Rockamaniac00, at Fortes Stabile. Send us an email if you want, rowdywrestling@gmail.com. Send nudes directly to Steve, preferably men. And we'll leave it at that. Let us know what you guys think. Thank you, Steve. And tune in tomorrow as I actually have a really fantastic interview with Damian the Barbarian of the Barbarians, talking about believe it or not, something kind of political, as we talk about the legalese behind border traveling between the United States and Canada for independent pro wrestlers. So check that out. RowdyWrestling.net. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, it's actually very interesting.
Should I drop? No, it's not to say it's not interesting. I was about to drop the story where we were once on a previous show, and we actually did some sort of mention of anything sort of political, okay? And the president got mentioned, and the CIA logged on to our website. Okay, so if next week, folks, the Rowdy Wrestling Podcast's Twitter accounts are suspended and don't exist anymore, it's because the CIA took us down.
A vengeful Trump. All right, well, thank you, Steve. And thank you to everybody. Keep on downloading. Keep on trucking. Love all y'all. Bye. Thanks for downloading today's episode. If you're new around here and like what you've heard, hit that like button and slap the subscribe one too. Leave me a comment and tell me what you thought, and I'll see all of you next time.